The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Martinez adjusted her helmet for the third time. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the cold mountain air, but from the weight of knowing she wasn't supposed to be here. The primary sniper had fallen ill with severe food poisoning just hours before the mission, leaving the unit scrambling for a replacement. Sarah had been cleaning her rifle in the armory when Sergeant Williams burst through the door, his face grim with urgency. "Martinez, you're up," he had said, barely looking at her as he grabbed ammunition from the supply closet. "Henderson's down for the count, and we need someone on overwatch for Operation Silent Thunder." Her heart had dropped into her stomach. She was backup, had always been backup. While the other snipers received the high-priority assignments and the recognition that came with them, Sarah spent her days maintaining equipment, running drills, and watching from the sidelines. She was competent, yes, but never the first choice. Never the one they called when everything was on the line. "Sergeant, are you sure?" "Maybe Rodriguez could," she had started to say, but Williams cut her off with a sharp look. "Rodriguez is already deployed on the Eastern Front. Peterson's on leave. You're what we've got, Martinez. The convoy leaves in 20 minutes. He paused at the door, his expression softening just slightly. "You've got the skills. Now you need the confidence to use them." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself bouncing in the back of a military transport vehicle, surrounded by soldiers whose faces she recognized but whose names she barely knew. They were the elite unit, the ones who got called for the dangerous missions while she sat back at base, practicing her shots on paper targets that never shot back. Corporal James Tank Morrison sat across from her, his massive frame somehow folded into the small seat. He had the kind of reputation that preceded him into every room, the kind of soldier whose stories were told and retold until they became legend. Next to him sat Private Lisa Chen, a communications specialist who could hack into enemy systems faster than most people could type their passwords. Then, there was Medic Danny O'Brien, whose steady hands had saved more lives than anyone could count. And then, there was Sarah, the backup who never got picked for the team. The vehicle hit a particularly rough patch of road, and Sarah's rifle case bounced against her knee. She instinctively reached to steady it, her fingers running along the familiar edges of the case that held her most trusted companion. Inside was a modified M24 sniper rifle, a weapon she had spent countless hours maintaining and practicing with, but had never fired in actual combat. "First time out here, Martinez?" Tank asked, his voice rumbling over the noise of the engine. There was no malice in his tone, just genuine curiosity, but Sarah felt the question like a spotlight shining directly on her inadequacies. "Yes, sir," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the butterflies performing aerial acrobatics in her stomach. "Don't call me sir, I work for a living," Tank grinned, the expression transforming his intimidating face into something almost friendly. "We're all enlisted here. Just Tank will do fine." Lisa looked up from the tablet she was working on, her fingers never pausing in their rapid dance across the screen. "Martinez is the one who consistently scores highest in marksmanship training, right? I remember seeing the scores posted last month." Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment and pride in equal measure. She did score well in training, exceptionally well actually, but training and combat were different worlds entirely. On the range, the targets didn't move unexpectedly. They didn't shoot back. They didn't have families and dreams and fears. "That's right," Danny chimed in, looking up from the medical supplies he was organizing. "I've seen her at the range. Impressive groupings at distance. Very impressive." "Training scores don't always translate to field performance," said a voice from the front of the vehicle. Sarah looked up to see Staff Sergeant Marcus Webb turning in his seat to face them. Webb was the unit leader, a man whose every movement spoke of years of combat experience and hard-earned wisdom. His eyes, a startling blue against his weathered face, seemed to see everything and judge accordingly. "With respect, Staff Sergeant," Sarah said, finding her voice despite her nerves, "they're the only performance metrics we have to go on." Webb studied her for a long moment, and Sarah felt like he was reading her soul, cataloging her strengths and weaknesses with the precision of someone who had learned to make life-or-death decisions about people in seconds. Finally, he nodded. "Fair point, Martinez. We'll see what you're made of soon enough." The transport vehicle began to slow, and, through the small window, Sarah caught glimpses of the terrain they would be operating in. Rolling hills covered in sparse vegetation stretched out toward distant mountains, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. It was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, the kind of landscape that could hide dangers in every shadow and depression. "All right, listen up," Webb called out as the vehicle came to a complete stop. Operation Silent Thunder is a protection detail for a high-value convoy moving through this sector. Intelligence suggests possible enemy sniper activity in the area, which is why we're here. Martinez, you'll be positioned on Hill 347, approximately 800 meters from the convoy route. Your job is to provide overwatch and early warning of any threats. Sarah nodded, her mouth suddenly dry. 800 meters. It was well within her effective range, but the reality of what she was being asked to do was settling in like a lead weight in her chest. She wasn't just going to be shooting at paper targets or clay pigeons. If she had to pull that trigger, there would be a human being on the other end of her scope. The rear door of the transport vehicle swung open, revealing a landscape bathed in the golden light of early morning. The air was crisp and thin, carrying scents of sage and distant wood smoke. In any other circumstance, Sarah might have found it peaceful. "Move out," Webb commanded, and the team began filing out of the vehicle, each soldier checking their equipment with the practiced efficiency of professionals. Sarah slung her rifle case over her shoulder and grabbed her pack, following the others into the bright morning air. The weight of her gear felt heavier than usual, or perhaps it was just the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. Tank fell into step beside her as they began the hike toward their designated positions. "You know," he said quietly, his voice pitched low so only she could hear, "I was backup once too. First time I got called up to the major leagues, I was convinced I was going to mess everything up and get everyone killed." Sarah glanced at him sideways, finding it hard to believe that the legendary Tank Morrison had ever doubted himself. "What happened?" "I did my job," he said simply. "That's all any of us can do. We train for these moments, Martinez. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and trust your team. We've got your back out there." The hike to Hill 347 took 40 minutes, following a winding path that led steadily upward through increasingly rocky terrain. Sarah's breathing was steady but heavy by the time they reached the designated position, a rocky outcropping that offered an excellent view of the valley below. Webb gathered the team around him, pulling out a map and pointing to various positions. "Chen, I want you here with communications array. O'Brien, you're with Chen for security and medical support. Tank, you take the southern approach with the heavy machine gun. Martinez, your position is up there," he pointed to a cluster of rocks about 50 meters higher up the hill. "Best sight lines to the convoy route and good concealment. Questions?" Sarah looked up at the rocks Webb had indicated, noting the natural camouflage they would provide and the clear field of view down into the valley. It was a perfect sniper's nest, the kind of position she had studied in tactical manuals but never actually occupied in a real operation. "No questions, Staff Sergeant," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Good. The convoy is scheduled to pass through at 1,100 hours. That gives us 90 minutes to get into position and conduct final equipment checks. Move out." Sarah climbed the remaining distance to her position, her legs burning from the exertion and the weight of her gear. The rocks provided exactly the concealment and stability Webb had promised, forming a natural hide that would make her virtually invisible to anyone in the valley below. She set down her pack and rifle case, then spent several minutes studying the terrain through her binoculars. The convoy route was clearly visible, a dirt road that wound through the valley like a brown ribbon. On either side of the road, countless potential hiding spots dotted the landscape, any one of which could conceal an enemy sniper. Opening her rifle case, Sarah began the methodical process of assembling her weapon. Each piece fit together with the precision of something she had done thousands of times before, her hands moving with automatic efficiency even as her mind raced with possibilities and scenarios. The M24 felt familiar and reassuring in her hands as she mounted the scope and checked the action. She had fired this exact rifle so many times that it felt like an extension of her own body, every scratch and mark as familiar as her own reflection. Setting up her shooting position, Sarah arranged her equipment with careful precision. Her spotting scope went on a small tripod to her left, providing a wider field of view to complement the rifle scope. Ammunition went within easy reach but protected from dirt and debris. Her radio was clipped to her vest where she could reach it without moving from her shooting position. "Overwatch 1 in position," she reported over the radio, using the call sign Webb had assigned her. "Copy, Overwatch 1. Communications check, all stations report in," Webb's voice came back through her earpiece. One by one, the other team members reported their positions and readiness status. Sarah listened to their calm, professional voices and felt some of her nervousness begin to settle. These were experienced soldiers who knew what they were doing, and they were counting on her to do her part. Through her spotting scope, Sarah began a systematic scan of the valley, looking for anything that seemed out of place or potentially threatening. A bird landing on a rock could indicate the absence of human activity in that area. A glint of metal or glass could suggest enemy equipment. Even the pattern of shadows could hide dangerous secrets. The morning sun continued its steady climb, and Sarah felt sweat beginning to form under her helmet despite the cool air. The waiting was always the hardest part, the time when minds had freedom to wander into dark territories and imagine everything that could go wrong. Her radio crackled to life. Overwatch 1, this is command. Convoy is 15 minutes out from your position. Be advised, intelligence reports possible sniper activity in grid squares Delta 4 through Delta 7. Sarah consulted the map coordinate system she had memorized during the briefing. Delta 4 through Delta 7 covered a wide area on the opposite side of the valley, roughly parallel to her own position. If there were enemy snipers in that area, they would have clear shots at the convoy and would be operating at roughly the same range she was. Copy, command. Maintaining overwatch, she responded, then began focusing her attention on the areas of concern. Through her rifle scope, the distant hills jumped into sharp focus. Sarah methodically scanned each potential hiding spot, looking for the telltale signs that might indicate an enemy position. A flash of movement, an unnatural shape, anything that didn't belong in the natural landscape. Minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Sarah's position was comfortable enough, but the mental strain of maintaining constant vigilance was exhausting. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every movement in her peripheral vision could be the first sign of contact. The sound of distant engines began to echo off the valley walls, growing steadily louder as the convoy approached. Sarah shifted slightly to get a better view of the road, her rifle tracking smoothly as she maintained her scan of potential threat areas. Through her scope, she could see dust clouds on the horizon, kicked up by the approaching vehicles. The convoy consisted of 3 military trucks escorted by 2 armored vehicles, carrying supplies and personnel to a forward operating base deeper in hostile territory. Convoy in sight, she reported over the radio. Maintaining overwatch. It was then, with the convoy still several minutes away from the most vulnerable section of the route, that Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. A brief flash of light from the hills across the valley, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. But she knew she hadn't imagined it. Someone was up there, and they had optics pointed toward the approaching convoy. Sarah's training took over, her breathing automatically slowing and deepening as she focused her scope on the area where she had seen the flash. For several seconds, she saw nothing but rocks and scrub vegetation. Then, like a photograph slowly developing, she began to make out the subtle signs of human presence. A small pile of rocks that was just slightly too regular in shape. A patch of vegetation that was bent in a way that suggested something had been placed behind it. And there, barely visible even through her high-powered scope, the outline of what could only be a rifle barrel. Sarah's heart rate spiked, but her hands remained steady as she adjusted her scope for precise ranging. The enemy sniper was approximately 900 meters away, well within her effective range but a challenging shot under the best circumstances. These were definitely not the best circumstances. Contact, she said quietly into her radio, her voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Enemy sniper position identified, grid reference Delta 5 Alpha. Range 900 meters, bearing 270 degrees from my position. Copy, Overwatch 1, Webb's voice came back immediately. Do you have a clear shot? Sarah studied the target through her scope, noting the limited exposure and the way the enemy position was designed to provide maximum concealment. She could see enough to know someone was there, but actually hitting the target would require perfect timing and a significant amount of luck. Partial concealment, she reported. I can see the position but target is not fully exposed. The convoy was now less than 2 minutes away from the kill zone, the point where the enemy sniper would have the clearest shots at the vehicles and their occupants. Sarah knew that if she was going to act, it had to be soon. Through her scope, she saw movement in the enemy position. Someone was shifting around, probably getting ready to engage the convoy. This might be her only chance to prevent a potential massacre. Sarah took a deep breath and began her shooting sequence, the same routine she had practiced thousands of times on the range. Her breathing slowed and became deliberate. Her muscles relaxed as she found her natural point of aim. Her finger moved to the trigger, taking up the slack but not yet applying the pressure that would send the bullet downrange. The enemy sniper chose that moment to show himself, rising slightly to get a better shooting position on the approaching convoy. For just a few seconds, Sarah had a clear view of a human target, someone who was preparing to kill the soldiers in those trucks. Time seemed to slow as Sarah made the decision that would change everything. Her finger moved smoothly to the rear, and the rifle fired with a sharp crack that echoed off the valley walls. Through her scope, she saw the enemy sniper jerk and fall backward, disappearing behind the rocks that had concealed his position. Sarah immediately began scanning for additional threats, knowing that enemy snipers rarely operated alone. "Target down," she reported, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what had just happened. She had just killed another human being, a reality that would stay with her for the rest of her life. But there was no time to process the emotional impact of her actions. The convoy was still approaching, and there could be additional threats she hadn't identified yet. Sarah continued her systematic scan of the valley, her rifle ready to engage any other enemy positions that might reveal themselves. The convoy passed through the kill zone without incident, the trucks and their escorts continuing on their route toward the forward operating base. Sarah maintained overwatch until the vehicles disappeared around a distant bend in the road, her rifle scope tracking smoothly as she watched for any last-minute threats. "Convoy clear," she reported. No additional contacts observed. "Outstanding work, Overwatch 1, Webb's voice came through her earpiece, carrying a tone of approval that Sarah had never heard directed at her before. "Pack it up and prepare for extraction." As Sarah began the process of breaking down her equipment and preparing for the return journey, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. She, the backup who never got picked for the team, had just successfully completed her first combat mission. More than that, she had likely saved the lives of everyone in that convoy. But, along with the pride and relief came something else, something darker and more complicated. She had taken a life, ended someone's story so that others could continue theirs. It was the harsh mathematics of warfare, but knowing it was necessary didn't make it any easier to bear. Tank appeared at her position as she was packing her rifle case, his massive frame moving with surprising quiet across the rocky ground. "Hell of a shot, Martinez," he said simply. 900 meters in field conditions, partial concealment target. That's the kind of shooting that saves lives. Sarah looked up at him, seeing approval and understanding in his eyes. Tank had been where she was now, had faced the same moral and emotional challenges that came with being a sniper. His opinion carried weight that went far beyond his rank or reputation. "Thank you," she said, not trusting herself to say more. "First time is always the hardest," Tank continued, settling down on a nearby rock as Sarah finished packing her gear. "You did good out there. You did what needed to be done, when it needed to be done. That's what separates the real snipers from the ones who just know how to shoot." As the team regrouped for the journey back to base, Sarah found herself walking with a different posture than she had that morning. The weight of her gear felt familiar now rather than burdensome. The rifle case on her back carried the tool that had proved itself in combat. And, somewhere deep inside her chest, a small flame of confidence had been lit that would grow stronger with each passing day. She was no longer just the backup. She was a sniper who had proven herself when everything was on the line. The question now was what would happen when they got back to base, and the commander started asking questions about that single, perfectly placed shot that had echoed across the valley and changed the course of the mission. The journey back to base felt entirely different from the morning's ascent. Where Sarah had climbed Hill 347 with nervous energy and uncertainty, she descended with the quiet confidence that comes from having faced a moment of truth and emerged successful. The weight of her equipment no longer felt burdensome, but familiar, like the tools of a trade she was finally beginning to master. Webb called for a rest stop halfway back to the extraction point, and the team gathered in the shade of a large boulder outcropping. Sarah noticed how the dynamics had shifted during their brief mission. Where she had been the uncertain newcomer that morning, now the other soldiers looked at her with a respect that hadn't been there before. "Martinez," Webb said, pulling out his field notebook and settling down beside her. "I need you to walk me through that shot. Range, wind conditions, target exposure time. Everything." Sarah took a sip from her water bottle, organizing her thoughts. The details of the shot were crystal clear in her memory, each element preserved with the kind of perfect clarity that comes with moments of intense focus. Target was at approximately 900 meters, bearing 270 degrees from my position. Wind was minimal, maybe 3 to 5 miles per hour from the southeast. Target exposure was brief, maybe 4 to 6 seconds when he rose to engage the convoy. Webb scribbled notes as she spoke, occasionally looking up to ask for clarification on specific details. "How many rounds did you fire?" "One," Sarah replied simply. Webb's pen stopped moving. He looked up at her with an expression that was hard to read. "One shot? At 900 meters? In field conditions?" "Yes, sir." A low whistle came from Tank, who had been listening to the conversation while cleaning his weapon. "One shot, one kill. That's some serious shooting, Martinez." Danny O'Brien looked up from the medical supplies he was reorganizing. "What was your confidence level when you took the shot? Were you certain of the target identification?" It was a good question, one that cut to the heart of the ethical complexities that came with being a sniper. Sarah had learned in training that positive target identification was crucial, that the decision to fire had to be based on clear evidence that the target posed an imminent threat. "Positive identification," Sarah said firmly. "I observed the target for approximately 3 minutes before engagement. I could clearly see rifle barrel, scope reflection, and tactical positioning consistent with preparation for engagement of the convoy." Webb nodded approvingly. "Good. That level of observation and patience shows excellent judgment. A lot of shooters would have taken the shot as soon as they saw the position." Lisa Chen had been quiet during the discussion, her attention focused on her communication equipment, but now she spoke up. "I monitored enemy communications during the mission. About 10 minutes after your shot, we picked up radio chatter indicating the enemy knew they had lost a sniper. They were calling for extraction and seemed pretty shaken up." The information sent a small chill through Sarah. It was one thing to know academically that she had eliminated a threat, but hearing that there had been an entire enemy team operating in the area made the reality more concrete. Her single shot had disrupted an entire enemy operation. "Any indication of how many hostiles were in the area?" Webb asked. "At least 3, possibly 4 based on the radio traffic," Chen replied. "They scattered pretty quickly after the shot. Seems like losing their sniper took all the fight out of them." As the team prepared to continue their journey to the extraction point, Sarah found herself walking beside Chen, the communications specialist who seemed to know everything that happened within a 50-mile radius. "Can I ask you something?" Sarah said, keeping her voice low so the conversation remained between them. "Shoot," Chen replied, then immediately grimaced at her choice of words. "Sorry, probably not the best expression given the circumstances." Sarah smiled despite the tension she was feeling. "It's fine. I was wondering, do you think about them? The people on the other end of the radio when you intercept their communications?" Chen considered the question carefully as they navigated around a rocky section of the trail. "I try not to think about them as individuals," she said finally. "It's easier to do the job when they're just tactical problems to solve rather than people with families and dreams. But, yeah, sometimes I wonder about them. What brought them to the point where they're trying to kill us, what they think they're fighting for. Does it make the job harder? Sometimes. But, then, I think about the people in that convoy, the soldiers who get to go home to their families because we did our job. The math is pretty simple when you break it down to the essentials." The extraction point was a small clearing where the transport vehicles waited, their engines running and drivers alert for any signs of trouble. As the team loaded their equipment, Sarah noticed that her rifle case was treated with a different level of respect than it had been that morning. Tank personally helped her secure it in the vehicle, handling it with the reverence reserved for tools that had proven themselves in combat. The ride back to base was quieter than the morning journey, each team member lost in their own thoughts about the mission they had just completed. Sarah stared out the small window at the landscape rolling past, trying to process the flood of emotions and thoughts that came with her first real combat experience. Pride mixed with uncertainty, confidence blended with a nagging worry about what came next. She had proven she could do the job when it mattered, but she also knew that this mission would mark the end of her anonymity. Word would spread quickly through the base about the backup sniper who had made a 900-meter shot under pressure. As they approached the base, Webb moved to sit across from her, his expression serious but not unkind. "Martinez, when we get back, there's going to be a full debrief. The commander will want to hear every detail about that shot. There will probably be questions about why you were in position instead of Henderson, questions about your training and experience. Sarah's stomach tightened. She had been so focused on the mission itself that she hadn't thought much about the administrative aftermath. In the military, every bullet fired had to be accounted for, every action justified and documented. Just tell the truth, Webb continued. You were the available qualified personnel, you followed proper procedures for target identification and engagement, and you successfully eliminated a threat to friendly forces. The rest is just paperwork. The base came into view as they crested a small hill, a collection of temporary buildings and defensive positions that represented home and safety after a day in hostile territory. Sarah felt a complex mix of relief and apprehension as they approached the main gate. The transport vehicle stopped at the motor pool, and the team began the familiar routine of unloading gear and securing equipment. Sarah pulled her rifle case from the vehicle and slung it over her shoulder, already missing the weight and purpose it had provided during the mission. Martinez, Tank called out as she headed toward the armory. Good hunting today. Looking forward to working with you again. The comment stopped Sarah in her tracks. Working with her again. The implication was that she would be called up for more missions, that she had proven herself worthy of being included in the elite units that handled the most dangerous assignments. She made her way to the armory to secure her weapon, going through the familiar routine of cleaning and storing the rifle that had served her so well. As she worked, other soldiers began filtering in, word of the successful mission already spreading through the base. Hey, Martinez, called out Corporal Jackson, one of the primary snipers who had always treated her like a junior member of the team. Heard you made quite an impression out there today. Sarah looked up from cleaning her rifle, noting the difference in Jackson's tone. There was no condescension now, no sense that he was talking down to the backup. Instead, there was genuine interest and what might have been the beginning of respect. Just did my job, Sarah replied, echoing the simple philosophy Tank had shared with her earlier. Hell of a job, from what I hear. 900 meters, one shot. That's the kind of shooting that makes legends. Before Sarah could respond, the armory door burst open and Sergeant Williams entered, his expression a mixture of pride and barely contained excitement. Martinez. The commander wants to see you in his office. Full debrief on today's mission. He paused, studying her face. You did good out there, soldier. Real good. Sarah secured her rifle in its designated rack and gathered her gear, mentally preparing herself for what was likely to be an intense questioning session. The commander, Colonel Morrison, was known for his thorough approach to mission analysis and his ability to extract every relevant detail from the personnel under his command. The walk across the base to the command building felt longer than usual, with Sarah acutely aware of the looks and conversations that followed in her wake. Word traveled fast in a military environment, and by now everyone on base probably knew that the backup sniper had scored a significant victory during her first combat mission. The command building was a more substantial structure than most of the temporary facilities on the base, constructed to house the communication equipment and planning facilities that kept the entire operation running. Sarah had been inside a few times for general briefings and administrative matters, but never for a personal debriefing with the commander. Colonel Morrison's aide, a sharp-eyed staff sergeant named Williams, looked up as Sarah approached his desk. Private Martinez reporting as ordered, she said formally. Go right in, Private. The colonel is waiting for you. Sarah knocked on the commander's door and waited for permission to enter. Colonel Morrison was a tall, lean man with graying hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention even when he was sitting still. His office was spartanly decorated, with maps covering most of the wall space and a single photograph of his family occupying a place of honor on his desk. Private Martinez, please have a seat, Colonel Morrison said, gesturing to a chair positioned in front of his desk. I've received preliminary reports about today's mission, but I want to hear the details directly from you. Sarah sat down, maintaining the proper military bearing that had been drilled into her since basic training. Yes, sir. Where would you like me to begin? Start with the moment you identified the enemy position. Walk me through your decision-making process. For the next 45 minutes, Sarah provided a detailed account of every aspect of her shot, from the initial visual contact to the final confirmation of target elimination. Colonel Morrison listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions about specific details or requesting clarification about her observations. You fired only one round, he asked at one point, his tone suggesting that this detail was particularly significant. Yes, sir. I observed the target for several minutes to ensure positive identification, then took the shot when the target presented a clear profile.
And you're confident that you neutralized the threat?
Yes, sir. I observed target fall and did not see any subsequent movement from the position. Colonel Morrison made notes on a legal pad as she spoke, his handwriting neat and precise. When Sarah finished her account, he leaned back in his chair and studied her for a long moment. Private Martinez, you understand that what happened today is somewhat unusual. We don't typically send backup personnel on primary missions, and it's even more unusual for those personnel to be the ones who make the critical shots. Sarah's heart rate picked up slightly. She wasn't sure if the colonel's comment was leading toward praise or criticism, and his neutral tone gave no clues about his assessment of her performance.
Yes, sir. I understand that I was selected due to circumstances beyond anyone's control.
That's correct.
However, circumstances have a way of revealing capabilities that might not otherwise be discovered.
Staff Sergeant Webb speaks very highly of your performance today, as does the rest of your team. The colonel stood up and walked to the map-covered wall, studying a detailed representation of the terrain where the morning's mission had taken place.
A 900-meter shot under field conditions is exceptional shooting by any standard. The fact that you accomplished it on your first combat mission is remarkable. Sarah remained silent, unsure whether a response was expected or appropriate.
In her experience, it was better to let superior officers finish their thoughts before offering any input. I'm recommending you for the Army Commendation Medal, Colonel Morrison continued, turning back to face her. Your actions today likely saved multiple lives and prevented the enemy from achieving their tactical objectives. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The Army Commendation Medal was a significant recognition, the kind of award that could fundamentally change a soldier's career trajectory. She had gone from being an overlooked backup to being recommended for a medal in the span of a single day.
Thank you, sir, she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. Don't thank me yet, Private.
Recognition comes with responsibility. Word of today's mission will spread beyond this base, and there will be people watching to see if your performance was a fluke or an indication of your true capabilities. The colonel returned to his desk and picked up a folder that had been sitting beside his computer. I'm also recommending you for advanced sniper training at the Special Operations Combat Training School. It's an intensive 6-month program that will provide you with the skills and certification to serve as a primary sniper for special operations units. Sarah felt like the ground had shifted beneath her feet. Advanced sniper training was something she had dreamed about but never seriously believed would be offered to her. It was the kind of opportunity that could transform her entire military career.
Sir, I don't know what to say.
Say you'll take advantage of the opportunity, Colonel Morrison replied with what might have been the beginning of a smile. Say you'll work hard and continue to develop the skills you demonstrated today.
Yes, sir. Absolutely, sir. Good. The training program begins in 2 weeks.
Use the time between now and then to prepare yourself physically and mentally.
It's going to be the most challenging thing you've ever done.
As Sarah left the commander's office, her mind was reeling with the magnitude of what had just happened. In the space of a single day, she had gone from being a forgotten backup to being selected for elite training that would fundamentally change her role in the military. The base seemed different as she walked back to her barracks, the familiar buildings and pathways now seeming like stepping stones toward a future she had never dared to imagine. Other soldiers she passed offered nods of recognition or brief words of congratulation, word of her success having spread throughout the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. In her barracks room, Sarah sat on her narrow bed and stared at the wall, trying to process the emotional whirlwind of the day. This morning she had been nervous about her first real mission. Tonight she was being recommended for advanced training that would place her among the elite snipers in the military. But, beneath the excitement and pride was a deeper understanding of what her new path would require. The shot she had taken that morning was just the beginning, the first step on a road that would demand everything she had to give. The backup who had never been picked for the team was about to become someone entirely different. The question that would haunt her dreams that night was simple but profound: was she ready to become the soldier that everyone now believed she could be? The answer would come with time, training, and the crucible of future missions that would test not just her shooting skills, but her character and resolve. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah could still feel the weight of her rifle in her hands and hear the echo of that single shot that had changed everything. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new expectations, but tonight she allowed herself to feel proud of what she had accomplished.
The backup was backup no more.
2 weeks later, Sarah found herself standing in formation with 19 other soldiers at the Special Operations Combat Training School, located in the mountains of Colorado. The facility was unlike anything she had experienced before, a collection of state-of-the-art buildings nestled among peaks that seemed to touch the sky itself. The other candidates around her represented the cream of the military's sniper community.
She recognized several faces from competitions and training exercises, soldiers whose